Welcome to Surviving Saturday, a podcast about finding hope in the midst of life's disappointments.
We resonate with the powerlessness that Jesus' first followers experienced as they waited between his crucifixion on Friday and his rising on Sunday morning.
We feel led to bring light and goodness into a world that aches and wonders when relief will come.
Here you'll find no easy answers, just honest conversations about actual pain through the lens of a suffering God.
I'm Wendy Osborne, a licensed counselor based in Charlotte, North Carolina.
And I'm her husband, Chris, a counseling intern and family law mediator.
Join us as we wait together for more. Hello and welcome back. Hi, Chris.
Hello, Wendy. Lovely to see you yet again.
We are here today with a guest some of you may have heard of, former author, now speaker, former pastor, Josh Harris. Hey, Josh.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on the show.
So glad to have you. So intrigued to hear your story. You wrote a book that came out in the late 90s, I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
That's right. Yeah, 1997.
1997, the year before our first child was born. So we're just about at 3 decades.
We were saying that we did not come up during that. We had married by then, so dating was a far thought, and our kids were a little young. They weren't dating anytime soon, since they were still being born. But I remember reading about you in Christianity Today, reading about the book, reading about sort of the hubbub, and it was kind of a movement sort of thing. So you're culturally fixed in our minds, definitely as, remembering that moment for sure.
Yeah. And you authored this it came out when you were 21. Is that right?
Yeah, right around there. That's right.
Right around there. So would you start by just bringing us into the story of how this book became a thing that you did?
Yeah. Boy, it's crazy to think that that's been almost 30 years ago. And sometimes I think, why am I even still talking about this? And the answer is that ideas have consequences, and ideas, especially around sexuality and marriage and all these kinds of things, are obviously so central to what it means to be human, and the decisions we make around those have such, long-lasting consequences. Who we marry, the people, who we start families with, all those kinds of things. So, yeah, 30 years ago, I wrote this book, and I'm still talking about the fallout of it because there's been, real negative impact in many ways. So all that to say,
before you keep going, when I first heard of the book, I think it was probably, so we were involved in church planting here in Charlotte, and it was probably among some of the people coming to the church straight out of college, closer to the demographic that it was written for. And they were like, oh, I read this book in high school, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, so I've just always courted. Or, co-parents with us, like, oh, I think I'm going to practice this with my children when they're older. Yeah. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, okay, well, that sounds kind of interesting, sounds kind of safe. Like you sort of date as a friend group, so to speak. You're all a pack, sort of like moving around from place to place. And I remember thinking, I probably have questions. I don't really get how this works because it was very different than my own experience. But what led you to the idea of courtship?
Right. Yeah. So I was raised in the church. My family was really closely involved in the homeschool movement, the Christian homeschool movement in the 80s and 90s. So when I was a teenager, I was the oldest of the kids in my family, oldest of 7. And, for my parents, it was kind of like they homeschooled their kids to pull them out of, the ungodly influence of the public school system, secularism, all those things. And then, these kids became teenagers and the hormones kicked in, and they're like, whoa, wait a second. We didn't do all this homeschooling to have them run off with,
Right.
and get into trouble with dating. And so part of what happened in the homeschool community is this, my parents' generation, they started talking and saying, well, wait a second, this isn't healthy. We don't want our kids to do what we did when we were teenagers, because we were, that was the 60s and we were doing all kinds of stuff. And that's not what's going to happen. And so they had a kind of reaction and started looking for alternative voices. And so, for example, Elizabeth Elliot's book, Passion and Purity, was a big influence. Yep. You had people like Bill Gothard and with his basic life principles talking about, the umbrellas of authority and talking about courtship and those kind of ideas. And so, really the mindset was dating takes place outside of the home. We don't want that. We don't want ungodliness and premarital sex. We should bring this into the home under the influence of parents, under the authority of parents. So, I was hearing that message from my parents and the homeschool community. And then in youth group, I was a part of a evangelical megachurch youth group, and they were talking about abstinence and true love waits. And, the Southern Baptist Convention was doing a big push. This was, the culture wars were in full effect. Parents were worried about premarital sex, abortion, AIDS, all these things. And so they were saying to their young people, sex is something that you save for marriage. It's this gift that you give your spouse. So I was hearing all of these messages, all the while had a secret girlfriend at the youth group, was making out with her, was doing all this stuff, did not want to read Passion and Purity. I was like, no, thank you. And so,
I'm just thinking of how terrible that title is. If no adolescent boy is ever going to pick that book up with that title.
Passion and Purity. Not.
He doesn't want
to. I joke that I read really. I read all the Passion and I skipped the Purity. That was my approach to that book at the time.
Gosh.
So that was kind of the atmosphere and the bigger cycles or things that were taking place in the world around me. I was just a kid, and I kind of went through a kind of personal moment with the Lord where I've got serious with Jesus. I rededicated my life to the Lord, and I wanted to serve the Lord. I wanted to do great things for the Lord. And so I followed my dad into public speaking. I started traveling with him, talking to other kids about, homeschooling, started publishing a magazine. And in that magazine, we started talking about these ideas that we were hearing about, dating, courtship, and so on. And that's where I started and essentially taking in all these ideas and saying, you know what, we need to be serious about the Lord. We say we're supposed to save sex, but if we're dating, it's leading us into temptation. Here's what it really means to be on fire for Jesus. And there was a huge response to that. And that's when I wrote this book. I got a book contract, and it's crazy looking back now, thinking about the influence that happened at such a young age. But it was really me as this passionate, ill-informed, naive kid saying, hey, everybody, we needed to go even further if we want to be serious about serving God. And it just caught on and snowballed and became, this really kind of influential moment where all this frustration with dating and concerns about worldliness and parents and pastors and so on, it all, unfolded in what we now look back on and call purity culture.
Well, we should point out that this was also all pre-advent of the internet or the internet becoming ubiquitous or anything. And even idea of, oh my gosh, your dating pool can expand to people anywhere, and you can have matching, services. I remember when people first, it was probably about 5 or 6 years after that, we met the first people who had met on eHarmony or Match.com.
Yep.
So
yeah,
you didn't have that sort of technological structure out there saying, hey, Christian mingle, find these people. And so as you're describing it, I'm struck by there's an appeal of, hey, we're going to protect you from some of the craziness that would happen in dating and all.
Mm.
And also just the whole emphasis on, and we look back on it a little bit differently now, but in the middle of it, it was coterminous with, it was one-to-one with evangelical Christianity. If you love Jesus, you think this way about sexuality, and you think this way about marriage. And we were defining ourselves by, we're not like those, not quite heathen, but mainline churches, that aren't as serious about it. And there's a little self-righteousness to it, I think.
Even just that we bought into dating out there is unsafe, but I can have them in my house and they're safe. I'm thinking, look, we were homeschool parents. We were not trying to keep them from the evil of the public schools. However, I think I thought they would skate on through life without much trouble. Okay. But the bottom line is there was a failure to recognize, the darkness out there, I'm not immune to it in here. It may be a different dark, but I'm not going to, by having my children in my home all the time, make them immune to sin or painful interactions.
I think I was secretly hoping that our kids would date and fall in love with somebody in our homeschool group. At some point in time, I think that thought entered my head. We've all kind of grown up and gone separate ways, and now it's a horrifying thought. I'm like, that would have been no guarantee, no protection against anything, and
funny.
Not either direction. I mean, that's so naive, but I could see the appeal though.
And I want to look back, and I'm sure you've had to grapple with this, that there's a bit of a tenderness I want to pour out on these younger selves, where there was an earnestness, like you were wanting to do something really good and right. I mean, now there are ways, and we'll get into what led you to retract the material, but at the time, what was the good that was guiding you, would you say?
Yeah, I think the good that was guiding it was a sincere desire to protect myself and others from the games and the selfishness that can happen in, relationships. And even today, you don't have to look far for people to be frustrated with dating. It's a mess out there, and people are they're insincere, they play games, they hurt each other. There's a lot that takes place there. And I think I looked at all of that. I looked at ways that I'd, broken the heart of my high school girlfriend. And there's real conviction. There's this real sense of, I want to do something different. And here's what the Bible says sincere love is: putting the needs of others first. If we're really brothers and sisters in Christ, we shouldn't be using each other in these ways. Like all those things, I still think are quite beautiful.
Right.
And so on. And I think I look back on my parents, and I think they were doing their best to try to protect and, help their kids. And I think part of, you grow older and you live a little bit of life, and you just recognize that when you have that desire to kind of control, and I'll do anything to keep my kids from experiencing what I experienced, it can be well-intentioned, but it often backfires. There's just a reality to the complexity of life that when we start gripping things too tightly, it can actually create a different set of problems potentially. And I think that's the thing that I've had to grapple with over the years, that regardless of my good intentions, a lot of the ways that I wrote my book, the emphasis of it and so on, it did instill fear. It was like, well, if you do the wrong thing, it's going to be really bad. And if you follow God's plan, it's just going to be, peaches and cream and, rainbows and all those kinds of things. And it's easy to, in a desire to protect and to help others, to overpromise, or to use fear to try to control, to go beyond what Scripture actually says to kind of seal the deal, all those kinds of things. You kind of play fast and loose with Scripture, and you end up creating new rules. You end up creating rules outside of the Bible, and that does, come back to haunt you.
Well, I was thinking about, just as you were saying that too, what are the key gospel passages, the red letters that Jesus said about dating? I can't think of one at all. He talked about marriage, yes, but it was mainly about certificates of divorce, and you might leave husbands, wives, father. Jesus had no guidance on dating. And that, when I just even sit with that thought, I'm like, the fact that, and it wasn't just your book, there's so many others that canonize these are the Christian principles about that. And like our kids are like, if you get your dating principles from the Bible, then you're talking about dowries and Leah and, the whole Leah and Rachel story just makes them, scratch. What is going on here? It really, I can see it now as more, isn't it interesting and almost kind of comical that we thought there was something so strongly prescribed where it's not. And we do that a lot with scripture, I think. But that's, to me, it's a more glaring area now, but you couldn't tell me that, during that time frame.
Okay. And so look, I don't want to miss that some people that benefited from the book may still hold the principles dear. They may say, that really protected me. And so I want to bless your earnestness and bless that it has been, a gift to some people. What opened your eyes to begin to wonder or to see actually there's some content in here that seems more harmful?
Yeah. Well, it was a really long process, to be honest.
Okay.
I didn't contemplate that or consider that for a long time because I was convinced that this was God's message, and the fact that it was a bestseller was just more confirmation.
Yes. Yes.
And
one, it worked for you as well, right?
That's right. I got married, and even if it hadn't worked for me, I couldn't admit that to myself because then my whole life would crumble. I'd have to, I wouldn't be qualified to be a pastor. I wouldn't, so there's just a lot of self-reinforcing things that were taking place. But, I think essentially I hit a point in midlife where things didn't turn out exactly as I hoped. The perfect church that I thought I'd been a part of erupted in controversy and division.
Okay.
Fights between leaders went public. People that I had relationships with that were mentors, those relationships were broken. There was a lawsuit because we'd failed to report sexual abuse properly. Like all these things happened that really left me in this place of being like, I wanted to be a pastor to help people, and I've actually, helped build something that's not helpful to people. So there was a lot of disillusionment and sadness. And during that time, I stepped back from being a pastor to go to seminary because I realized, what, I need to learn in a different context. I need new voices. I've learned everything I know about leadership here, and I need to step away from this. And it was in that moment that I had the space to start evaluating a lot of different parts of my faith and life and so on. I was a student. Like I wasn't having to be the pastor who is defending the party line, teaching everybody else, all those kinds of things. And I started listening to the stories of my fellow students, like, because they were sitting next to me like, oh, well, do you want to hear how your book was used for me? And I was listening to them.
In that context, in that seminary context.
Yeah, for sure.
People who had, what a setup.
Definitely. Yeah. And that was a much healthier setting than just reading reviews on Amazon. Like, you can find people that say your book is awesome and people who don't like it, and you just, tune out the ones you don't want to read. But when it's a friend and they're telling their story, that's a different experience. And so I actually, through many different things took place to bring this about. But essentially, this process of evaluating my book got pushed into the public through an interaction on Twitter. And I realized, what? I need to really step back and ask the question, what do I think of this book? It's not enough for me to just be like, well, I'm sorry if it was misapplied, or I don't agree with everything in it. It's like, I was like, I really need to do an accounting and evaluate this. And so while I was at graduate school, the Theological Seminary, I did a guided study with one of my professors. I read all these different books on sexuality and sociology and history and was really just trying to understand what are the things that shaped the world that I was growing up in. What was the impact of this book? And I reread the book, after many years and with new eyes. And that process of listening to stories, inviting people to share their stories, actually doing a documentary where I went out and talked to people face to face about it. It was a long process. It was a scary process along the way. I wanted to, pull the escape hatch and just like end it because it was scary. But I eventually got to this place of like, on balance, I can't stand by this book anymore. Like knowing all these stories of how it's caused harm to people and infused fear with people and so on. I can't, be proud of it still being published. And so I apologize for the book. My publisher, I'm so grateful for them. They unpublished these books and took them off, stop putting them out into the world. And so that was a really big step for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Your integrity is stunning. Okay. Like you began to hear people's stories while looking them in the face, and you chose to grapple with what had formed you, and then with what you had formed had caused in others. Like that is so courageous and so integrous. Like many people, I think would do what you said, of like, well, I can't be responsible for the way everyone applies it or
and
reads
I was
it.
young and I didn't know everything. Okay.
Right.
But a lot
But
of people would stop right there.
Right. What you're describing to me is
Believe me, I was tempted to do that.
Of course. Of course. Why would you not? Right. The question is more, why did you not stop with just that? Like this feels to me like an incredible act of repentance.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for saying those kind words. I look back on it and I do think that there were so many ways in which so many parts of my life were falling apart. My sense of identity in being a pastor, my sense of identity in being this author, behind the scenes struggles in my own marriage, doing all these interviews with people and hearing the effects of purity culture and realizing, oh, like this has also shaped my life. Like there was a lot that was taking place there. And so I really appreciate your encouragement. I feel like, if when you look at all the details of how it unfolded, it was sort of a beautiful mess. It was a beautiful mess that humbled me enough to be willing to take that step. But I'm grateful that it unfolded in the way that it did. I wish that I'd seen these things sooner. Sure. There's been a lot of collateral damage, but that's part of the chance that we're having to talk is because of, part of my hope for the rest of my life is wherever I can tell this story, as honestly as I can, acknowledge the part that I played, share what I've learned. Not that I have all the answers now, but just say here there are unintended consequences of these kind of ideas, and then highlight voices that are speaking to this. And that's where, I'm coming to Charlotte with Stephanie Stalvey because she's got a book coming out. And she's this amazing graphic artist, this talented writer, and she's written this graphic memoir that's telling the story of growing up in that purity culture context that my book helped to create. Like, we've become friends across the continent, and she was this teenager that had I Kiss Dating Goodbye on her nightstand, and was shaped by this. And the power of her story, which is so incredible, is that she tells the story of like the impact of those ideas in her own body, the fear, the tangible like effect of these, what I would now say wrong ideas. Even though she was in a loving, beautiful relationship, there was shame, there was guilt, there was all these, all these impacts. And she tells that story in a way that I just think is so beautiful and so healing. And so I'm like trying to come back around and say, you know what? I helped to make this mess look at these beautiful, incredible, talented people who are trying to clean it up and
Yes.
who are using the power of story to tell a better story, honestly.
Yeah.
Well, I want to highlight something for listeners who may not know, because what a lot of people might have done is then, okay, you write the retraction book and you then make that a big deal and you make your living on the speaking circuit again. Okay, I'll undo it all. You're not doing that.
Right.
You have, like, Clear and Loud. We were looking into your main business. Your main way of making money is you've got kind of branding and message development and coaching and all this stuff. And you're not making money off of, walking back what you did with I Kissed Day and Goodbye. And in fact, you are amplifying the voices of the other people who are out there with that story to tell.
Yeah.
And it's just,
thanks for
just
pointing
amazing
that out.
And unheard of. Yeah.
Yep.
I just want to make sure people understand that's not, because we've seen that. We've seen the, okay, you caught me. And now I'll write about that. And now I'll be the guy who got, who fell really hard, but then wrote about that really well.
Yeah.
And they're the public, and especially the non-Christian public is like, y'all are messed up, like,
it's true.
Just leave. But before, so I want to make sure people understand that, but I would love for you to say more, if you can, about what were, and if you have ideas without, saying people's names, but what were the stories you heard? What was the impact that, and how did it affect you to make you go, oh my gosh, I'm not sure this was helpful. Can you give people sort of a taste of what you did hear and how it affected you?
Oh boy. The volume of stories was quite overwhelming. I put out a request for people to share on my website back then. And I think we got close to like 600, responses.
Wow.
In some cases, long responses telling the details of their stories. And then as part of the documentary, that it was a student-led documentary, it was crowdfunded. We made it available free. So again, not a moneymaker in any way for me. But we had a day where just people were calling in from all over the world. I was just doing these short little calls with dozens and dozens of people. And I think the thing that I would say, like some of the things that stand out to me would be stories of people who, even after they were married, felt shame and guilt around sex.
Yes.
So it's like they spent so many of their single years with this crushing guilt, any sexual thought, any impulse, interacting with the opposite sex, all this kind of ideas of shutting that down, that's wrong, flee temptation, and so on. And then they get married and they're supposed to just flip that switch on, and it's everything's going to be, perfect. Well, that's so that doesn't normally happen that way, and there are some, I know couples that it worked out great for them and I'm happy for them, but there are so many more where those ideas, your body is bad, your body is sinful, your sexuality is constantly trying to lead you astray. Well, those ideas, they take root in our bodies. And it's not easy to just like suddenly become this, amazing sexual creature who's just excited and ready to dive into things. So,
and part of the problem was
that was one story that was really consistent.
I was going to say, we even though we were, dated and married before your book, but we were impacted by that aspect, I would say, of peer culture. I would say we were, again, in a weird sort of window because we grew up in the 80s, went to college in the late 80s, early 90s. But we were impacted by that. The expectation, what was told to us young, men, teenagers, was save yourself for marriage and the sex will be wonderful and it will be plentiful all the time. And you won't have to worry about, lust and stumbling again. What a crock. What a, but it felt like a, well, that's okay. And so then when things weren't as easy or didn't flow as easily, which was certainly the case for us, we're like, oh, dang, what's wrong with us?
You feel like
or did we do something wrong? Did we go too far? Even though we didn't have, intercourse, did we go too far in whatever we did? Are we being punished for that? You're racked with all kinds of guilt.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really true. Yeah, that story was so common. And then I think, just the stories of where people were, they didn't have the opportunity to interact with multiple people before they got married. You know,
Yep.
there wasn't a healthy pattern of dating so they could understand who they are, who they match up well with, you know, those kinds of things.
Yep.
And so they're looking back and they're like, wow, I married this person so quickly, had no idea what I was getting into. And it's because of this incredible pressure to not date and court and, you know, pursue marriage
Yep.
quickly. So it's just it was a pressure cooker. Like, relationships and marriage, it's already hard. Like it's you know, it's complex in any era, in any religious context, it's complex. But there was this pressure cooker of, you need to do things right so that you honor God. You need to, you know, any kind of sexual activity is the biggest deal. You've lost your virginity, all these kinds of things. So there's this psychological pressure where you're literally worried that you'll ruin sexuality for yourself for the rest of your life, or possibly go to hell. I mean, it's like as if you need any extra,
stakes are high.
Trauma. Yeah, exactly.
And some of the metaphors or images that were used were just so healthy and destructive, only in retrospect. You know, of having to, you know, I remember, what was it?
There's like chewed bubble
gum.
Who
wants to chew bubble gum that's already been chewed? That is just horrific when you stop and think about that.
It's wild because, you know, we don't treat other, what, you know, in like the Christian world, when it comes to talking about behavior and sins, we don't treat other sins that way. You know, we don't come up with these crazy metaphors for greed. Like, every time you're greedy, you know, the bubble gum gets chewed. It's just like, oh, well, if you're greedy, you know, just repent of that,
just
you know, you'll be fine. So it really was this moment where, again, sexuality is unique because of a lot of different reasons, but the social issues that were taking place, the control issues, the fear, you know, there was a lot more going on than how do we help people thrive as human beings. That was not, there was a lot of other things that were factoring in, which created this environment of, let's ratchet up the you know, the promise, and let's ratchet up the fear so that we control behavior. And as long as people get married and they're virgins, everything's great. That is just so short-sighted.
It seems very simplistic, doesn't it? Like, if that was all it took, we probably wouldn't have a divorce rate. Yeah.
Well, I think the reason that I, like, you know, Stephanie and I have been working on the content of this event that we're doing called Beyond Purity Culture. She's the main event. I do just kind of introductory remarks. Then we're having a dialogue portion and a Q&A portion. She's going to share, you know, the journey of creating this book, her new book that's coming out. And one of the things that we've dialogued about is just like, the reason that we think this is so important to have this conversation is not just a looking back, like, oh, 30 years ago, purity culture happened, and let's, you know, just dwell in the past and so on. It's because these issues are so right now. They're so present. Like, every new generation is dealing with this. You know, the fallout of these ideas is still affecting people's relationships, their view of their bodies, their view of sexuality, and so on. And if you spend time in certain parts of, you know, TikTok or Instagram, you'll find there's a whole new generation of, you know, kids that are kind of like, you know, the new version of I Kiss Dating Goodbye, that are popping up and are sharing these kind of radicalized views of sexuality and so on, ideas about marriage and so on. And I'm not trying to like criticize them. I think it's important they have the freedom to have the views that they have, but we're trying to come and say, hey guys, like, there are implications to these things that you might not have thought about. And we've lived through them. And so let's have this conversation. Let's talk about, you know, the impact of these ideas.
Well, and what I find in my counseling practice over and over is parents who were affected by the purity culture still grapple with their own shame sexually if they haven't done a lot of healing work, but then it gets visited on their children. Okay. And their children may be in a very different place. Their children may be in a, I can do what I want, you know, place. But now the parents are projecting their shame onto what their children are doing. I'm not saying don't protect our children, not at all. I think there is a lot of toxicity that goes on in teenage dating, and there's a lot of rape culture. And, I'm all about protecting our children, but this purity and sexual shame continues. And so I find that it's often we have to go upstream to help the parents get free so that they can guide their children in a way that both has integrity, respect, love, and care as they want to lead them through dating.
Yeah. That's so powerful. I'm so glad that you're doing that kind of work. And I think it's just a reminder of how interconnected we all are, right?
Yeah.
Like when we pursue healing, when we're willing to go back and ask questions about why we did what we did and what the results of that was, and how can we be more healthy today? Like that work spills out into the people that we're connected to. So I love that you're talking to parents about those things and helping them to be just a better source.
Well,
for their,
and let me be
families.
clear, and I have since repaired and laughed with our children that the sex education I did with them sucked. It was through homeschooling, and it was reproductive systems. And I came to them later and I'm like, I failed you. And two of them looked at me and giggled, and they're like, "It's okay, Mom, there's the internet." And we had a good laugh. They're like, "We know it all." I'm like, "Can you ask me anything?" They're like, "Really? We're fine." But in all honesty, I was still too caught in my own shame, body shame, sexual shame, to have the conversations that needed to be had. And so we're having more of those as they are now adults, of like, what does all this mean to all of us? Like, how do we deal with our bodies and with the fact that we are sexual beings?
Well, and you'll notice that she's the only one who refers to any kind of conversation or any mention of sexuality, which on the one hand, you want to respect the dignity. I'm not sure,
we raised all daughters.
We raised all daughters, and they may not have wanted dad to say a lot about the subject. Okay. But for it to be so taboo and for it to be so, oh my gosh, the idea, that both of us are sexual beings. And for that to be so taboo and so hush hush, but let's don't acknowledge it. I'm not saying you should be just, out in front, like, look, kids, watch, or anything like that. Nothing to desacralize or to make things worse, but to make it so taboo and so off topic for it to be so awkward when it comes up is there's got to be a corrective somewhere else. I remember a friend saying a long time ago that the cure for wrong use is not disuse, it's right use. The cure for not talking about sex is not, or for talking about it wrong is not to just not talk about it at all. That makes it worse.
Right.
But what is it? And if you have you done anything, I guess some of the people that you are involved with promoting their work are, because we don't want to just be saying, okay, not that. You might get a lot of a fairly easy agreement around that, but what's healthy? What's better? What are you finding that people are gravitating to as a positive? Don't kiss anything goodbye, but embrace this.
Yeah. Well, this is where I'm really grateful. There are a lot of amazing voices that are focusing on embodiment, understanding pleasure, consent. I see a lot of somatic coaches, therapists that are speaking to this. It's not my area of expertise. And so I try to just like repost and highlight, voices that are doing this kind of work. But I do think that those are some of the really important common themes to even be able to acknowledge and appreciate, the ability to experience pleasure, not just sexually, but in the broader use of the word sensuality is kind of a shift for a lot of people, and I think a lot of people through a misapplication of biblical ideas have shut down that part of themselves. And so reconnecting with that is something that's really important. again, I keep coming back to Stephanie's work because I'm such a cheerleader for what she's doing. I do think that there's something really powerful about her storytelling being in the form of a graphic novel. And I know there might be some people who like, I've never bought a graphic novel. I don't read comic books. Make an exception for Stephanie's book, because it's almost like a written book is powerful. Obviously, it can paint a picture and so on in your mind and everything. But as she draws these images of her own story and shows her reaction to the concepts of purity culture, and even shows the beauty of her relationship with her husband, James, and their love story, it embodies that on the page. Like, you're seeing these things, and even the pictures of them, kissing, like there's a part of it that's like, oh, there's a little shocking, like from, your prude Christian reaction, but it's an example of like holding out the goodness of the physical, And so I'm really excited for how her work can impact people. And I think, she talks about how even the process of creativity was part of her healing process. Like, connect with yourself, connect with expression, even the physicality of painting, which I think is a really amazing insight. Like, these are all parts of this reversing work from, the negative aspects of purity culture, which is shut down your body, shut down sensation, avoid any kind of, fantasy or like just anything that makes you feel alive and sexual is bad. So what does it look like to reverse that? It's not just going out and having sex with everybody. It's not living a dangerous sexual life or something like that.
Right.
I think it's much more tied to reconnecting with who you are as a human being and the sensuality of that.
Yeah, I often think it's as if sexual shame has been injected into our veins through movements like the purity culture movement. And what will it take to drain that and replace it? Transfuse it.
That's great.
With a trust that bodies are good, that sexuality and sex are good. They are not to be brashly embraced or avoided. That there really is a goodness there.
But it flows out of a deeper problem. It's one that we've been exploring actually at Warehouse. So your arrival is going to be well timed, because we've been, this is really where we've, at least, and you were probably ahead of it as far as ahead of me in considering this, but the idea of embodiment in general, I think there's some of our language around, the flesh. Okay. We have three enemies, the world, the flesh, and the devil. And the flesh got sort of, for me, morphed with body. Like the body is bad. And it's better, passages like it's better to marry than to burn. And your body is basically just, chaos waiting to happen. And your body's what's going to take you down. The Spirit of God is what's good. Even songs I used to like I love Switchfoot and I love all their songs, but they got their one where they say, the skin and bones is a rental, and they, the body is temporary, the spirit lasts, but that can lead to a denigration of the body, and a disrespect of the body. And it's been powerful for me to embrace, I am a body. There's even a C.S. Lewis quote that I now look at differently. It says, you have a body, you are a soul. Like, no, you are a human, which has soul, body.
I threw it away after one of our kids pointed it out.
Love Lewis in a lot of ways. But this whole idea of the body is the enemy is bad versus, well, why did God get in one? And Jesus walked around and confined himself to one. So it can't be inherently terrible. What do we make of that? But talk about it to the extent your work overlaps with that.
Well, I can't improve on anything you said. I'm just clapping over here. I just think that's so well said. And I do think there are deeper issues of how we view ourselves as humans and implications to how theology gets applied, that it's just important that we be willing to revisit. And this is where I think, I hope that my story can be an encouragement to people. It's so easy to ride the hype train of movements and, best-selling books, and then not stay around to see the fallout? And if the fallout is negative, like, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to learn from that? Let's not just like repeat that same cycle again. And so, this work, this Beyond Purity Culture event, even the fact that Warehouse, I so appreciate them being willing to host this and allow us to come and do this. To me, it's so hope giving that there are local communities, local churches that are like, no, let's do a retrospective. Let's evaluate what we got right and wrong. We don't have to be condemned or shamed, but let's be willing to face up to these things that we did conferences about and sold books about and so on. If everybody just moves on and is like, oh, it wasn't me. I didn't, it's somebody else's fault. It's like, no one's going to learn. No one's going to grow from that.
That's right. So let me take a moment to officially announce. So our church here in Charlotte, Warehouse 242, is hosting you and Stephanie Stalvey, that we have mentioned a few times now, who has a book available for pre-order. I've already ordered it. I don't remember the name. Do you remember the name, Josh?
It's called Everything in Color.
Everything in Color. And it is a graphic novel that charts her journey out of purity culture. And it is like, she posts on Instagram, and it is a beautiful depiction of the goodness of bodies and what the purity culture has cost bodies. She is a lovely voice and a very honest one. She's also just fun to listen to. So y'all are coming together to Warehouse 242 in Charlotte on Sunday, March 1st. Is it at what time? Do you remember what time it is?
It's at 6. It's 6 p.m. Is 6 to 8 p.m.
That's what I was thinking. And then I wanted to make sure I had the time right. So that will be here in Charlotte. And there is a way to sign up through your Clear and Loud website, right?
Well, if you if you go to beyondpurityculture.com,
beyondpurityculture.com, okay,
you'll be directed to the site with all the details on the tickets, and the tickets go to helping Stephanie be able to take this message to more cities, which is really amazing. She's giving a portion of it also to a local charity that works with women who have been exploited. And I'm just donating my time. So I'm amazing. Just excited to be able to be a cheerleader for it.
And you're also partnering up with somebody else that I know that Wendy's a huge fan of as well, Hillary McBride. The author of Holy Hurt, the book, right? Can you say a little bit about kind of how that partnership came about and what you guys are doing?
Well, if people are going and purchasing books, add to your list Holy Hurt. Dr. Hillary McBride is a psychologist and really insightful person who's writing about spiritual trauma, naming the reality of spiritual trauma, talking about what healing can look like in a very powerful, honest, really accessible way. And so we've had the chance to do several events together where I'm coming to really just share my story. Like, I was a pastor. I sadly passed on a lot of spiritual hurt through things that I did and said. And now I'm learning, and I'm trying to make repair, and I'm trying to tell a different story. And she shares from her research and kind of the bigger picture of what's taking place in regards to spiritual trauma, and how spiritual trauma really touches every part of our being, because it's all about connection to others, to ourselves, to God. So those events have been really incredible, and just being able to participate in those has been a real honor for me.
Yes. And some of those have been recorded, right? I feel like I watched the two of you have a conversation. Do you know if
we did a podcast interview together?
Maybe that's what I saw. And it was
and then
powerful.
she also has a whole podcast series
called Holy Hurt,
right? Which the book came out of and was based on. Yeah.
And then, speaking of body and somatic work, she has The Wisdom of the Body. book, which is fabulous. And then there's one that's practices of embodiment. I don't remember the name of the book, but she puts really good work into the world. So thank you, Josh.
Does. Amazing human. Yeah.
Thank you for the way that you have let your story continue to play out. Thank you that you did not stop with your original earnestness, but you listened to the stories of the people that were affected in ways that were negative. And you have chosen what I'm calling your repentance tour. I don't know what you're calling it, but it to me is so heartening to see a former pastor say, I want to make right. I mean, if we would all do this and follow in your footsteps, this world might be looking a little different than it is right now, rather than holding on to control. So thank you. And thank you for being here. Thank you for coming to Warehouse Church in March. I hope, our cat knocked something down. I hope that people will get tickets and join us for the night of you and Stephanie Stalvey for Beyond Purity Culture.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
The Surviving Saturday podcast is brought to you by Nurture Counseling PLLC, a counseling, teaching, and training center based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. We help families flourish one story at a time. Nurture Counseling provides counseling intensive for couples, conflict resolution coaching, story work groups, seminars, workshops, and retreats to provide a safe and welcoming context for exploring the agonizing experiences of pain, brokenness, and evil that disrupt our lives, and that God often uses to nurture deeper trust and intimacy with Him and with each other. You can find us online at www.nurturecounseling.net.